Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is Wendy Klosterman. I'm the Dean of Faculty and Professor of History and Greek at Bryn Athyn College, and I'm delighted to introduce our speaker this evening, Mike Morton. Mike is an alumnus of Bryn Athyn College. He graduated 20 years ago in 1998 with a bachelor's in history. He also holds a master's in American history from Villanova and a master's in disaster management from the University of Leicester. In addition, he has graduated from the Ontario Public Services Leadership Development Program and completed a certificate in Aboriginal law from Osgoode Hall Law School. Since he was an undergraduate, Mike has been active in emergency management, including serving on the Bryn Athyn Fire Company, certifying as a fire officer, emergency medical technician, and instructor. And emergency management became the focus of Mike's professional career. In 2002, Mike began working for the government of Ontario in the Office of the Fire Marshal and Emergency Management. He moved into managerial positions there in 2005. And since 2016, he has been serving as the Director of Emergency Management for the province of Ontario. In addition to this work with the Ontario government, Mike is also a member of the United Nations Disaster Assessment and Coordination Team, which he joined in 2006. In this capacity, he has been on UN missions in the Philippines, Africa, Central America, and the Caribbean. And he was the first UN responder in Haiti after the devastating earthquake that occurred there in 2010. Mike leads UN training internationally as well. I'm sure you'll all agree that this brief outline points to a full and impressive career. But I would be remiss if I didn't also at least mention Mike's work for the Red Cross as Director of Disaster Management in Ontario and for Ontario's Ministry of Transportation. Mentioned that he's a co-manager of companies in Buffalo, New York, related to socially focused real estate investing, and that he has received awards for the work in his career, including the Amethyst Award, which is the Ontario Public Service's highest award. Before turning the floor over to Mike, I'd like to look back in time to 1995, when I first got to know him. At that time, he was an undergraduate at Bryn Athyn College, majoring in history, working at Glencairn Museum, and very involved with the Bryn Athyn Fire Company. He participated in a college Glencairn trip to Italy that I led, and not only do I vividly remember Mike's presentation about the Emperor Trajan, but I also clearly recall how hardworking, focused, and full of energy and enthusiasm he was, determined to make the most of every opportunity. Mike's bio and achievements indicate that these characteristics have not waned over the years. Mike also was, and still is, a thoughtful, dedicated, and caring individual. Bryn Athyn College is very proud indeed to be able to call Mike Morton an alum. Please join me in welcoming Mike Morton.
Thank you. Thanks. Just make sure my microphone is on here. It is. Thanks so much for inviting me to come and speak tonight at Bryn Athyn College. It was shocking when my mother-in-law Neva reminded me today that it was 20 years since we graduated, and it really feels like yesterday. And it was about a year ago that I was asked to come and do this talk. And of course, when you're asked to do a talk, you immediately start thinking about, what am I going to talk about? And it was a completely blank slate. So what I thought would be maybe an interesting focus tonight is just to share a little bit of my journey in finding my own use, because I think a lot of people, when they come to Bryn Athyn College, are in a very similar position to what I was in, of not really knowing what you want to do with your life. And at that point, there are so many opportunities, and as you look back on what you have done, it seems like an obvious thread or an obvious journey, and yet at the time, and at various times in my life, I can remember having absolutely no idea what I was going to do, what I wanted to do, what I could do, and at times, honestly, feeling a little bit stressed about that. And throughout, though, in reflecting on that journey, I feel like there has always been interesting moments where just as doors seemed closed, another door would open. And I was thinking a lot about this journey toward finding my use that spans all the way back to being a kid in Toronto, to just how many kind of coincidental moments that there were along that journey, and how if little things had been slightly different, or I hadn't met someone or had a certain door open, that really my career would be completely different. And honestly, I might not even have come to Bryn Athyn College. So I just want to share some of those key moments and some of those experiences that have been meaningful for me as I've searched for my use. And then at the end, I'll just do a few wrap-up thoughts. So to begin, where it all started, I was not actually born into the new church. I discovered the church through somewhat indirect means, just as I was going into grade 4. I had been having some difficulty in school. My parents were looking for a school for me, and a friend of my mom's business partner happened to be out jogging in Etobicoke, which is the west end of Toronto, and went by this church called Olivet, which is the society in Toronto, as many of you will know, and saw that they happened to have a school. And so that friend of my mom's business partner told the business partner, who told my mom, who said you might want to go and just take a look at that place. So she did. Thought it was a rather nice place. Imagine had a conversation with folks like Phil Schneier, who's here tonight, and was principal of the school. And they signed me up, and that was my introduction to the new church, which was because of a jogger talking to a friend's friend. And I went there on the first day to the Olivet Day School, and I was told, I guess the day before or so, that I was invited to somebody's birthday party already, because someone had a birthday that was on the first day of school. The guy sitting right here in the second row, Landon Sinisfet, is such a nice guy that he invited me to his birthday party before he even met me. So I went to my first day of school at Olivet, and then we went to Landon's house, and as we did many times thereafter, played war in good new church boy spirit, and argued about who shot who, and amazingly became, over a number of years thereafter, lifelong friends, and continue to be amongst best friends today. And just kind of that first amazing sort of step of, again, coincidental sort of things that helped me on my journey toward Bryn Athyn College. So I did stay at the Olivet Day School until 8th grade, graduated from there, and went into the public school system in Toronto. And yet, those years at Olivet and the instruction there really gave me a great foundation in what the new church was about, and I think really was where I shaped a sense of focus on use, and was really attracted by the idea of charity, doing good toward others. Apologies to the ministers in the room, but I was never kind of like the doctrinal kind of focus person, more the doing good things, more the deeds kind of side of things. But I really got a strong sense of that at Olivet. And I think that was a great foundation for then going back into the public high school system. And I did, different things through high school, did some, kind of things that you might expect, like museum internships, but I also did a lot of focus on martial arts. I was in the Army Reserve and, just did a lot of things. And as I was thinking earlier today, I was actually surprised that I came to Bryn Athyn College. I was trying to think how I ended up here. And I think it was just from my mom and church people maybe in Toronto dropping a lot of hints that there was a really good college here and I should think about that. And they told me a couple things that were really good reasons to come here. And, obviously great education, getting exposed to great teachers and all of that, but, you can do that in a lot of different places. Two of the things that really attracted me, and I think were attractive because of what they expose you to, what they let you do, the use that they represent, were the museum, so Glencairn, so I was very into history and that sort of stuff, and the fire department. And that actually was a major deciding factor for me to come here. I had been very interested in the emergency services, doing military service and that, looking toward other types of, somewhat similar service. So I made that decision to apply for admission to Bryn Athyn College, and I remember talking to Dan Sinisvet, and he let me in, so that was a positive moment after writing my essay. And I just, to come down here, I just packed a duffel bag, and I remember getting off the train in Beth Ayres and saw a little sign that pointed up this really big hill, and walked up the big hill and came here and saw Penn Hall and somehow checked into Childs Hall, and that was the start of my college career here at Bryn Athyn. And as I said, though, there were really two things that were driving my initial interest and sounded really cool. Like, honestly, just things sounding cool can be a great attraction to come to places. And I'll talk just a little bit about the first and the museum. This was a little bit of, even though I had the interest in coming, knowing it was here, knowing it's here, coming down, and then actually getting involved are really different things, especially when you don't know anybody. And you're this guy coming from Toronto, and you don't really know anyone in Bryn Athyn. I found a little card in my mailbox, and I was really happy to see that every student still has a mailbox in the common upper area there of the Commons. Really neat feature for a college that you have your mailbox with your name on it. And there's a little card in there from Stephen Morley that said, why don't you come over to the museum and we'll just have a chat? And why don't you come tomorrow at this time? Because you probably won't if I don't give you a time and a place to come. So I did, because he told me to. So I went there, and somehow very quickly I had a job at Glencairn that I think started with cleaning toilets, but that was okay, because everyone's got to start with literally cleaning toilets or the equivalent of that. And very quickly met some amazing people. In addition to Stephen, but you had Ed Gyllenhaal there, and Brett Bostock, Diane Fayon, and just all the other students that had got involved with Glencairn, and really was able to do some amazing things I don't think I would have been able to do anywhere else, from being trusted to run these huge special events like the museum dinner and create crazy Halloween afterlife tours and take people through the back alleys of the museum and that sort of thing, and really just build a love of material culture and the connection to religion and the stories that art can tell, and a real connection to education, to working as an educational intern, developing tours, developing programs, and all the mechanisms that go into that, and the confidence that builds, and the confidence that comes from people trusting you to do things. And I think that's another really key aspect that this college offers. Big enough to have opportunities, small enough that they're very personalized, and you can do things that I think in a lot of bigger places, talking to friends who went to University of Toronto or something like that, you're not exactly doing that same kind of thing at the Royal Ontario Museum or the Met. So just having those chances to be super hands-on and build that confidence and that love of those things, and then being able to actually present your projects on site in Italy, as Wendy said, were extraordinary opportunities that really developed a love for that sort of thing, a love for education and for programming and that kind of thing. So that was kind of one side of it. And then on the other side, of course, is the fire department. And another kind of thing that, even though I came with that real interest, I think anyone early on when they come somewhere, it can go different ways. Like, you can have an exposure to something and go, oh, that's not at all like what I thought it would be, I don't want to do that. Or you can have a very positive experience that leads to years of doing something. And another guy who's in the room, Scott Cooper, was a big part of my experience being the latter. So I remember going in a little phone booth in Childs Hall and calling up, you got to call Scott Cooper if you want to join the fire company. So, all right, even in the beginning of the Bryn Athyn directory, fire company, Scott Cooper. It gives his home number, I think, or something like that. So I called him up. Yeah, let's meet over at the firehouse. And I really didn't know what that was starting off. I never expected that would really be ultimately my career direction. It was interesting that I hadn't really thought of it that way at that time. It just seemed like a really neat thing to do. And again, it's okay to do things because they're fun and because you like flashing lights and that kind of thing as well. But Scott, and the officers of the company, others are here like Kenny and Greg tonight, really brought so much more to that. They were very focused on customer service and again, kind of like what you saw at the museum, and something I think is unique to Bryn Athyn, this idea that you can do almost anything. And the Bryn Athyn Fire Company, a lot of people don't know this, but like the museum, it really has made major contributions to its field, both on the medical side and on the fire side, and is an organization that way more people would have heard of than your average small town fire department, and has had amazing individuals who have gone on to a lot of different things, but it's special in other ways too, and that I think is kind of uniquely Bryn Athyn, in that I remember that the officers of the company actually drove me to fire school on Saturday and Sunday mornings on the weekend because I was poor and I didn't have a car and I was a college student. So they would actually take you to the fire school in Conshohocken, drive 20 minutes, get up at 7 a.m. and do that. And that just offered so many opportunities to get certifications and to do operational stuff that I don't think a typical college student would have the opportunity to do. But I think very importantly, to really get a feeling for the service aspect of that. That's something that's so powerful at the Bryn Athyn Fire Company, that the people who are doing that very much from a sense of use and service to the neighbor. And I think there's such a strong tie to, again, that idea of useful service and charity that's there in the fire company. And that's the kind of stuff that is character building and ultimately goes with you as you go on throughout your career. So, lots of other stuff happened while I was at college, but I did graduate, got my bachelor's in history, minor in education, and came to the inevitable question of kind of the next round of what next. So I have this history degree. I was a little schooled out at that point. I had gotten a scholarship to Villanova, but you get the fourth year, you've written a lot of papers, you've done a lot of school, and I just needed to step away from that for a little bit. So after getting married to India, I went to Toronto. We moved there together. I taught in Toronto for a year. We became part of the society there, and didn't really have a super long-term plan. And sometimes, you see those as gap years, but you sort of miss what's really going on, which is being part of a local church society, and in teaching, making what I thought was a very important difference in kids' lives. And I still know many of those kids that I taught for 1 year in Toronto, and they've gone on, some of them are teachers now, and that's a really neat feeling. But after a year, I was called back. We moved back to Bryn Athyn. I went to Villanova for history. I did some teaching here at the college and had another incredible opportunity that just is, like these things that seem like they happen by chance, but you look back and they're kind of connected. But Greg, again, up front here, said to me, hey, I've got this opportunity to write a book about this concept that we had been working on for a few years in Bryn Athyn, basically methodology to rescue firefighters who become trapped in buildings or have medical emergencies in buildings. How do you get them out? It's a lot harder than it sounds. And there's a lot of different situations people can get themselves into that are very dangerous. So Greg and I worked for a couple years and actually produced a whole textbook on rapid intervention for firefighters in distress. It was published by a major firm that does fire textbooks and became really the leading textbook for firefighter rescue in the US and Canada. And we're working on a second edition now over the last few years, and we will soon finish. But again, just one of these incredible opportunities that shows up, and it's just like all of these things that kind of set in motion from coming to a school that leads to a college, and calling Scott Cooper, and getting on a fire company, and meeting a guy like Greg, and being able to do these things that build so many different aspects of one's career. And I think for me that was really the first sense of a move from direct operational work to more systematic change. Like if you can put something in a book, if you change training curriculum, you start to affect people that are outside of your immediate sphere. And that started some gears in my mind, because I really, really like operational stuff. I really like doing field work and helping people one-on-one and doing stuff directly. And that became so clear in the time here in Bryn Athyn. And yet you also learn those lessons that sometimes you can have a greater effect of change or serve a broader use by doing things that teach others or help advance methodology in your field. So I did 2 years. I got my degree at Villanova, and then I had what I feel like was probably the greatest moment of now what next? You got all these different things I've been doing history degrees and working at museums and being on fire company and doing all this different stuff, but what does that actually let you do as a career? And that was the big question, and that was really kind of a stressful time to not know what the next step were. And we talked a lot about that and thought a lot about that, and we thought the path was to stay here in Bryn Athyn, maybe teach at the school or something like that. And it felt like so many doors closed. And I thought, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? It was a time of a lot of financial cutbacks here and some tough times. And it's not like if you kind of go into a very perhaps obvious career like an engineer usually becomes an engineer, a doctor usually becomes a doctor. What do, again, history majors become? So I went back to Toronto, and 9/11 happened. And for me, that was really a turning point. People that we had met through conferences, people that we had quoted in our book, Greg and I, were killed in 9/11. People had served with the New York Fire Department. And that was really a powerful moment. And right after that moment, I started applying to a whole bunch of government jobs. I just felt sort of a call to public service and wanted to get out there and serve at a higher level. And of course, applying to all those things right after 9/11, which was kind of a good time to be doing that because everyone was hiring, but also it requires like 6-month-long security checks and all of that stuff, and you put in applications and they all take a year. So I put in for military, I put in for intelligence, foreign affairs, and I was sitting on my mom's couch and looking at the paper, and I saw this ad that said, we're hiring emergency management officers in Ontario. I didn't know what that was, but it said emergency, so I thought I'd read on. So there was this organization called Emergency Management Ontario that I actually didn't know existed because I'd done all my emergency services stuff here in Pennsylvania, and I ironically knew more about Pennsylvania than I did about Ontario, my home province. So I looked at that, and it sounded like kind of a cool job description, so I put in. I later learned that I was putting in just at the very beginning of the longest public service strike in Ontario's history, which is why after 4 months I hadn't heard anything back. We were out in Michigan at Ned and Eva's place, and I got a call, and it said, can you come to an interview tomorrow downtown Toronto? I said, sure, I'll be there, yeah, no problem. And I was just, I was doing that for a whole bunch of different places. And they all kind of call at once. Like you go through this long process in hiring. If anyone applies to the government, like you need to be very patient. So you go through a lot of steps and you take a lot of tests. And I've been going through all different processes with different organizations and so on. And they all sort of call at the same time. You run and do interviews and that kind of thing. And I went in, and I did this after driving quite fast from Michigan to Toronto. I went in and did interview and went back to Michigan, and then they called me back to see if I could start in something like 2 weeks later or something like that. So I did, and it was just an amazing start. I asked lots of questions, but thought, wow, this sounds like a really interesting opportunity now that I know what it is. And It's launched, as Wendy said, a career with this organization of over 15 years, and I've had opportunities to second out, be loaned out to places like the Red Cross and transportation and learn a lot of different aspects like social services and public works and so on. But my core has always been with the Office of the Fire Marshal and Emergency Management, and I've had a really amazing opportunity to apply a lot of the things that I had picked up from the journey I just talked about, and yet you can't really see that when you're trying to look out. You can only really see it when you're trying to look back. And so I later said to a boss, I'm like, well, why did you hire me? Well, you have this balance of academic work, you can do research, you can present, you can run special events, you've done all the operational stuff, you've written curriculum. So then, that's actually not, now that I try and hire people like that, that's not actually the most common specification. People who can be both comfortable operationally and who can be comfortable academically. And emergency management is increasingly both of those things. It's complicated. It touches apart on almost every other aspect of government, from land use planning to cabinet level communications and media work and that sort of thing. And you have to have that kind of that generalist ability to just learn what the thing of the day is and what your officers are working on and what your priorities need to be to ultimately have a say on all sorts of aspects of public policy and be able to network with people across government to make that happen. So I've just had a really interesting opportunity to work in all different parts, from operational to a couple of things you see at the top there. Public education. We did a national program with the Scouts and Guides to make emergency preparedness part of their curriculum in Canada. Amazingly, the Scouts and Guides did not have that in their curriculum in Canada, and now can earn badges for that. So you have all sorts of different aspects, from kind of the gritty on the ground to the fancy operations center to just helping kids learn what to do if there's an emergency. And again, that's kind of that systematic change that really started to entice me, and that seed that kind of came out of here and has grown, and really that love that you don't always have to be the operational person, as fun as that is, that you really can affect a lot of systematic change and help a lot of people that way. Even things like contract management can be very helpful to many, many people by getting them supplies quickly, and just learning about that and mobilizing in that regard would just be an example of the kind of systematic change that we have the opportunity to work in within government. I want to talk just a little bit about UN experience. And again, there's so many different parts, but I just want to tell you a little bit about this experience because, again, this was an email. A little email came up to my boss. He didn't really know what it was. It said, oh, the United Nations is looking for members of their disaster assessment coordination team. And he's like, oh, maybe I'll just forward that email over to Mike. He might have some interest in this. And it could have just easily been just deleted, missed in his box. It was kind of sent out to emergency management directors across the country. But he thought, oh, maybe that guy Mike, he'll be interested in this. So he just forwarded me this email. I applied and somehow was accepted. Again, sort of, they were looking for this mix of academic and operational experience that is really valuable to them in the international humanitarian sphere. So just a little bit about that. There's an organization called the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. They're a global secretariat of the United Nations. They are based in New York City, and their job is essentially what it says on the slide, to help to coordinate the world's efforts in responding to complex and natural humanitarian events. So everything from war zone humanitarian crises to sudden onset natural disasters. OCHA is based around the world. They have regional and country-specific offices in the shaded countries, and they cover every inch of the globe in one way or another, including in developed nations, which would be involved in capacity development, but also at times may engage with the United Nations in response, like even to the US in Hurricane Katrina. The UNDAC, or again, the United Nations Disaster Assessment Coordination Team, is a subset and a tool of OCHA. It is the rapid response mechanism. It has 4 kind of parts of its concept, its staffing, so it's people drawn from national governments across the world. It's a methodology that all of them are trained in, is documented, and I've had since the opportunity to help advance and develop that methodology myself. It's a rapid mobilization network, 12 to 24 hours anywhere in the world, and it's standard equipment that everyone keeps in their closet. And they give you a standard kit, and when you get that call to be somewhere 12 to 24 hours anywhere in the world, you take that bag and you go there, and they make sure, hopefully on a good day, other equipment arrives at the same time, and you have food and water and all that good stuff. But that's what it is. They've done 200 international missions since 1993, and they have a specific UN resolution mandate to coordinate USAR, which is urban search and rescue, so buildings collapse, folks that go and do that, and now have a new mandate to also coordinate global medical teams that will respond all over the world to help the injured after usually a sudden onset disaster. I joined UNDAC in 2006. I did a 120-hour intensive induction in Switzerland, and I went on my first mission in 2007. It was Hurricane Dean in the Caribbean. I got to go to Tanzania the next year for infrastructure emergency, but the big one, as they'd say in the fire department, was Haiti. I've done other big missions since, but this really was an emergency beyond belief in January of 2010. I think, as people generally know, Haiti, Caribbean, 10 million people, mostly Christian, poorest country in the West. UN Security Phase 3, that means a lot of things, but basically it's a really dangerous place. Was exceedingly dangerous post-earthquake when many of the inmates of the prisons had escaped when the prisons collapsed, and all sorts of chaos had broken loose. It was site of an active peacekeeping mission, but also a country that is unfortunately disaster prone. There's a major fault that runs through Port-au-Prince, and you can see that continuing on toward Kingston, Jamaica, which so far in recent history has been spared. The actual fault line running through Haiti goes right through the mountains behind Port-au-Prince, the most populous part of the country, millions of people, large suburbs. It gives you a little sense of the 3D profile of Port-au-Prince. And this gives you a little bit of idea of how bad that earthquake was. This is the Mercalli scale of intensity. The middle band there, I know it's hard to see on the screen, but with the Roman numeral X, that's a 10 intensity, the red inner circle there. At that intensity of a shallow earthquake, looking at the scale, it's the kind of intensity that throws water right out of your swimming pool. It actually bends railway tracks. It's the kind of open up the ground sort of intensity, and it tends to collapse pretty much everything, even more modern construction. And that's the intensity. So even though Haiti was a 7, and you think, oh, 7, we've heard of 8s, it's really about where, what kind of soil type, what depth, and the shake scale is basically what you go by in terms of determining what sort of response might be required. So as soon as you see this, it's generated automatically. You know that this is a major disaster. Ban Ki-moon, who is the Secretary General at this time, recognized on his visit it was one of the worst crises in decades. Just some of the numbers that were mind-boggling. The real numbers aren't really known, but just an extraordinary situation on the ground where every part of society had been damaged, everyone had been affected, extremely limited logistics, just a very, very complex and very, very bad situation. The specific function I was given, and we were given these assignments as we were en route. We came down with the Iceland team, which stopped off, picked me up in Boston, and then flew into Port-au-Prince. You come in and you're looking over the city, and so much destruction. I mean, you just look at it and the size of it. The assignment I was given was assessment. So part of the UNDAC function is large-scale assessment, basically how much urban search and rescue do you need, how much medical intervention, and just what do you need. And they said, Mike, looks like you're going to be first, so start that assessment. It was like one guy. So you after several moments/hours of panic. You remember that you do have a handbook and once received some training that might come in handy, and maybe you should listen to it at this point and just go, just like if you're doing EMT or fire, or you've got an event, it's exactly the same thing. You just do what you're trained to do and try not to think about it too much. So coming into that, this is what you see. Where do you even start with that? And I had a quick calming down talk from the Geneva folks who we were able to reach on satellite phone. They're like, Mike, just keep it simple. Here's what you need to do. Boom, 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 boom. Don't have to reinvent the wheel. So they gave me some really good advice. The first part of which was get off the airplane. It's easier said than done. There was no ground services, and our pilot had been very insistent that we were landing in Port-au-Prince and not in the Dominican because we were carrying a USAR team as well as UNDAC. So the Icelandic USAR team, which have learned well from Inspector Gadget, carry ladders in the cabin, and so that they can get out of airplanes when there's no ground services. I would not have thought of that. So they quickly set up comms. We got out, and part of that assessment, it sounds so basic, but it's getting in there. There's no telecoms. It's seeing basically what's going on in the urban area. So we moved down by dump truck. Absolutely crazy the first night. Super quiet in the city, pitch black, debris everywhere, so super windy route. But we were able to do general assessment. I mean, at that point, the assessment is basically percentile of city and estimated population affected, and just what are you seeing in terms of injured and deceased and so on. And we got back to the airport the next morning, and this is basically the base of operations. You throw up a flag and check in your teams. But I remember doing a call at 6 a.m. on the airfield back to Geneva after we'd come out of the city that night and giving those estimates and feeling. The first thing I said is, don't quote me on this, because it'll be very loose. So 1 hour later, it's posted on the international message board and it's distributed to embassies so that they could base their international response. But good thing the message was, it's really bad and send everything. So that was basically the nutshell. It's like, I think I put a 80% damage of urban area estimate in the hundreds of thousands for wounded. And yeah, it was right, but just based on being able to assess maybe 40, 50 blocks or that kind of thing. But yeah, that was the message that went out, and the international community responded with 67 urban task forces and numerous field hospitals and all sorts of other resources. So just amazing, though, to kind of be that person on the ground and have that information, just hoping that you're doing that right and drawing on these other experiences from here, from fire company, from EMO and so on. So just to tell a little bit more about that mission. This is checking into the airport, so we wouldn't be running around illegally, but very basic. The rescues did get underway. It was the largest single USAR life-saving operation in history. And then we got into the more, I won't say the bureaucratic part of assessment, but start to apply a little bit more methodology. You move into day 2, you're into not just looking around, but methodically dividing up into USAR sectors, looking at what occupancies you have, what specialty buildings you have in these areas, and just trying to map it out and give some order to the chaos, to brief that to your operational teams on your operational cycles, which is a 24-hour period. And once that's established, we actually had to move out into the countryside. And it sort of repeats again. We were actually moving toward the epicenter, and nobody had really been out that way. Communications were down, roads were blocked, and we were operating in a really high secure environment where you had limitations on how you could move, particularly by ground, and you had to be super careful. But we were able to arrange that. We were able to move out, and just blown away by the amount of impact of these modern buildings that are collapsed. And people say, how come you can't get aid? How come you can't help everybody? Why don't you just go out and do it? Well, because every road looks like this. And just the sheer logistics, we think of such modern technology, modern world, we can do anything, and yet this is reality. You can't move trucks when there's debris. You have limited resources and limited capability. And everywhere you came, you would find people, as you get further out from the center, trying to do the same thing, trying to rescue people. So you call in the coordinates. You would, back to your coordination cell, you would hope that resources could be tasked where you had confirmed live entrapments. And then you had to move on because we're assessment, like we're just a light team, and we can basically just report information and mark coordinates. But we got out to the epicenter, and almost 90% devastation there. And what we're doing there is talking to a lot of people. We're trying to connect the needs. We're trying to mobilize resources out to them, figure out where the best areas to operate are. And you're just kind of working these checklists, working the training, and doing that sort of thing to bring aid to people. We later extended our assessment missions all over the country because you have secondary migrations. Injured people will leave the urban center that doesn't have services. They'll go back to home cities. They'll seek care in hospitals where they're operating. Along the way, you get accosted by the Associated Press, which is a good way to get message out, but you have to be ready for that at any time. I got put on the newswire all over the world, just with one quote from one town. And you have a lot of people that are really happy that you're there, which is an amazing and rewarding experience. But just one very particular story that I had shared before, but I just want to share it tonight because it's kind of connected to this idea of I don't know, coincidence isn't the right word, but sort of things happening. We were out assessing in northern Haiti, and it was evening. Our security detail was getting very nervous because we weren't supposed to be out after dark, and the local police chief said, "I really, really need you to come down this road." And he wouldn't say why. And going down a dark road in a dangerous place usually isn't a good idea, but sometimes you just have a feeling that you have to trust someone and you got to do something. So we talked our heavily armed security detail into going down the dark road, us unarmed guys, to go down the road, and because you can kind of tell the look on somebody's face that there's something really important, and you just have like that feeling. So we went down the road a ways, and we came to this mission, and Christian mission, and go inside, and there was an American doctor in there who'd come down from Miami, from a hospital ER there, and there were about 60 wounded children all over the gym floor. And he said 7 of these kids are not living past 12 to 24 hours. And we were able to actually connect with the American Navy, who was able to, the next morning at dawn, land helicopters there, fly those kids out to ultimately the Israeli field hospital, and those guys are amazing trauma folks. And all 7 of those kids lived because of that doctor, because of a million things, but partly because we just had a feeling to go down that road. And it's like you have this huge disaster, and yet little things like that can be so powerful. So that's a whole lot of emergency management, a whole lot of heavy stuff. I want to talk about just one other topic, and that's real estate. Because and the message here is that, in searching for your use, it doesn't have to be all the same thing. Like that's sort of something that I realized after a while. You think of very linear career, you think of doing one thing, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I've slowly discovered that you don't have to be just one thing, thank goodness, because I think lots of us want to be tons of different things and over different times. And this was, I think, particularly important too, though, because it was a joint use with India. And we actually started investing in real estate in 2007 in Florida. And it was neat. You get really broken down houses and you fix them up and you move people in and you give them a nice home. And our motive on this was never really to make tons of money. You obviously don't want to lose money, you want to make some money, but it was just sort of an interest in fixing things up and bettering things. And of course, we had some good success in doing that, and that's Melissa hanging out in Florida helping us look at houses, which she really doesn't like to do, but she comes along anyway. And we try and make it fun, but it hasn't worked. So, we had done a fair bit in Florida. It was kind of turnkey. Florida houses tend to be sort of new, and you fix them up, and they're okay, and they're in generally good neighborhoods and that sort of thing. So, silly us, we got bored, and we decided to start investing a little bit closer to home. We looked at the Rust Belt a lot. We started investing in Buffalo, New York. And I guess because combination of being bored and just wanting to do something useful and helpful, and that's kind of how we both are, we decided to fix up crack houses, criminally infested areas and homes and really unloved properties. And this was, in a lot of ways, a really good kind of different use, again, a shared use, but something really different than emergencies, something that would be a really good different angle for the brain, because you can't just do emergencies all the time. And we started buying these houses in neighborhoods that were run down, but kind of with the philosophy that if you buy the worst places in a neighborhood, you can actually change that neighborhood. And this is a principle that's been approved, I think, a number of times in the United States. There's some really good case studies of this, of where people go into a defined neighborhood and buy properties that are the worst. It tends to be those properties that are bringing the whole neighborhood down. And it's a very, very small percentage, which I wish I could remember, because it would be really great to say a specific number, but it's low. Very, very small number, like low single-digit percentages. So we started doing that. We started buying places on the west side of Buffalo that were full of criminals and people were dropping drugs out of windows, and we kicked them all out, and we just started fixing them up into really nice places. And I just for fun, put a few of those together, before and after pictures. So you have your before and you have your after. And some of these places are really dumpy. And we just go in and we try and transform them into places that we would want to live in. Like, that's our standard. We say, if we don't want to live there, then nobody should live there. Yeah, classic bathroom. Who doesn't need a lowered tub? So we've seen amazing things. This is the sort of nice version of the presentation, but you find all sorts of things, do all sorts of things. So we did a lot of houses. And then, for some reason, we bought an apartment building, because it was really crime infested. And it was this apartment building, this one apartment building that was in the neighborhood. We'd changed a lot of houses, a lot of them on kind of prominent corners where someone, not to get into gory details with the kids here, but someone was actually shot on our porch and all of that sort of stuff. So we realized that there was this one building that was really pulling the neighborhood down. It's the only apartment building in this whole neighborhood. We were able to get it at a really good price because it was really bad. And it obviously was a much bigger job than we thought, but we were able to just work through that, and later found out that it was designed by some pretty prominent architects, people who had worked on the Pan American Exposition, 1901. For the history buffs, that's where McKinley was assassinated, in Buffalo, and the Roosevelt inauguration site is in Buffalo. It was designed by these prominent architects, and it had this really nice history as being this building where the college professors lived and the professionals about town, and unbelievably, under 100 layers of thick green paint were features like this, beautiful arts and crafts era. And it was this really neat connection, even though it seems so different, this really neat connection back to learning about arts and crafts movement in Bryn Athyn, and working at Glencairn and seeing restoration work going on here, like at Cairnwood, and kind of being inspired by some of that stuff here, and being able to continue some of that thinking and some of that use to restore the building, even finding these beautiful fireplaces buried behind walls and rebuilding their mantelpieces from the 1905 blueprints, and just being able to really bring this back while putting all the modern touches in that tenants want today, and market that in a very positive way in a building that honestly was probably going to be torn down after it went on another 20 or 30 years fueling the local drug and gun trade. We counted one day 20 gang members going into one apartment, and then they were literally selling drugs on a card table on the front lawn. And India went through incredible journey with the police to get the folks out of that building, and now it is once again filled with professionals, police officers, nurses, physicians' assistants like Megan, and amazing people working in the universities and so on. So that whole neighborhood, crime is radically down. We don't obviously take, pardon. Like anything, it takes many, many people to do something, but we feel we've been able to help with that, to see that need, which is something that Brian Schnarr in front of me always said to me, you see the gap, you see the need, and you step in and you do something if that fits your use. And I've always remembered that. And, I think this has been an important aspect of that journey. There's the kids on the playground we built. So I'll just do a few final thoughts here. And I don't claim to be profound or anything, far from it. These are just some things I was thinking about as I did this. First of all, just as people are thinking about their use, no matter what part of your life that's in, I think that it's okay that you do things that are fun and cool. Sometimes I think we have to be really serious about our careers. You have to work really, you always have to work hard, but pursuing what you love, pursuing your official career is not necessarily your fun, and yet I really think you can do things that are neat and cool, and your motives initially don't always have to be, these huge abstract things. It can be because firefighting is cool and neat, and you get to do good things, and then so much more can develop out of that from some of those fundamental affections. The other thing is that I think you've got to be really think about not worrying too much about closed doors. Sometimes they can seem so drastic and so disheartening, like you can feel depressed, but that can sometimes make you miss doors that are opening. And a leader of mine in government said that to me a few years ago, and I thought that was really insightful. That if you're too busy worrying about the closed doors, you don't see those ones that are opening up for you. And sometimes those closed doors can be a blessing. I mean, closed doors here took us to Toronto and opened a whole bunch of other doors and a whole career and half of what I've been talking about. I think you have to have that faith. You have to feel that providence is constant, but so hard to see at the time. Whether it's something that's guiding you in the night down a dark road because that's what has to happen for those kids, or it's just something guiding you to your use. There's no secret, I don't think. I wish people would just, the voice would just say, go this way, do that thing. It would be so much easier. And you can't see it at the time, and yet I think if you have that faith that it's there, you won't distress as much when those inevitable challenges and dead ends arise. And finally, I think it's really important, this idea that you're not alone. So many of these things that I've been involved with have been so dependent on friends, on leaders, on colleagues, coworkers, teachers. There are always people who are interested in the same use. And you can find those people and you can pitch your crazy idea for a new business or for doing some useful charitable thing or something like that. There are always people that are going to share that interest and can help you with that. I think that's the very positive side of that. And you can join here organizations, like museum and the fire company and so many other things where you can find those like-minded people and explore those possibilities. And I think on the other side of the coin, though, it's really important to say, and it's something that my boss, the fire commissioner, says on every single presentation he gives, is that in the bad times you're not alone either. Particularly in the emergency services, people experience operational stress injuries, PTSD, from emergency service, military service, other events. And it can feel very unique. It can feel like there's nothing that can be done. But other people have done that before. Other people have experienced that. And there's almost nothing that mental health professionals have not seen or experienced already. There's always someone there. There's always someone who will help. And you got to make that call and that initial outreach to access that help and be brave about that. And brighter times will come. I'll conclude by just saying thank you to virtually everybody in the room who I have some connection to directly or indirectly, who has helped me and taught me as I'm reaching the middle point of my career and figuring out what the next steps will be and making some decisions about that and what the next decade will bring. So I just want to express my enormous appreciation to those who have helped along this journey, and to Bryn Athyn College, which has just given me such a foundation for doing so many things. I deeply appreciate it and am always willing to give back in any way I can, and that includes just a standing offer to students that might have interest in anything related to what I talked about in terms of careers or anything resembling advice that I may be able to offer, good or bad. But you can absolutely feel free to contact me, or if you're up in the Toronto area, you're very welcome to come visit our government facilities and get a little tour and just learn a little bit more about what we do. So I'll stop there. I think we may have a few minutes for any comments or questions. And thank you for being here. Thanks for listening.
So the UN is often said to be very bureaucratic. There's a lot of red tape. Do you find that in your experience? Is it difficult to work with the UN or the member states that contribute to your missions?
I think politics and differing of views is a constant reality, and yet the emergency response mechanism of the United Nations is one of those incredible examples, perhaps exceptions, where things tend to work very fast and where people are able to put aside their differences. I have found across the world really an amazing thing that emergency responders from all different countries, whether they're from US, Canada, Russia, China, Europe, Africa, have the same purpose, the same use. They want to help people, and when they come together, you don't talk about anything political, you just talk about who's going to help where and how you're going to get it done. So the UNDAC system is this incredible network of people from so many different countries of the world that just operate as equals and operate from the same methodology and come together like they've always known each other, and just for that single humanitarian purpose. And it really is, I think, very blessed to operate outside of the bureaucracy and the mechanisms. It really is purely focused on helping people and getting those resources where they need to go on the ground. So I've greatly appreciated the opportunity to see that direct cause and effect and that direct use on the ground.
So it's great to hear you acknowledge so many people that helped you along the way. Do you have any advice for students on how to seek a mentor and benefit from the wisdom of somebody who's done things before?
I think the hardest step in seeking a mentor is just that initial outreach. And maybe what the easiest thing to do is not necessarily think of those initial interactions as seeking a mentor, but maybe just an opportunity to learn a little bit about what that person does. There might be someone who runs interesting business or has had interesting life experiences in a career that is related to what you might have an interest in, because you're still figuring all that out for the most part. And to, it sounds like a cliche, but it really does work to just say, hey, could I maybe have coffee with you and chat for 20 or 30 minutes and learn a little bit more about what you do? And sometimes that person can see really interesting opportunity to work with you, and those things can morph, and if it feels appropriate, you can ask that can be a more formal or informal mentoring opportunity. But I think just making that initial contact and maybe not expecting too much of that at first can often open those doors, and maybe you would do that with a bunch of different people, and ultimately you'd find that you click a little bit more. But I'm surprised at how many, particularly in government, how many people don't do that, or if someone's hiring, they don't reach out to the hiring manager to learn a little bit more about the position, to express interest in. And it's something that hiring managers, at least across government, actually like. They like when people express interest in their positions, and are happy, to the extent that they're allowed to under all the rules, to talk to you a little bit about that opportunity. And you don't even have to do that in response to an active posting. You can say, hey, this seems like an interesting field or a neat thing. How does one go about getting in this? And it's amazing how many senior managers and directors and so on will just say, well, why don't we just have coffee? And you chat with a little bit. I'm free on this day. Come on over. Because it doesn't actually happen that much that someone does that outreach. So I think people will be surprised at the opportunities that can come from just that little bit of bravery, the equivalent of getting the card in the mailbox and going to see the museum director, or calling Scott and saying, hey, can I be on the fire company? Just the doors that can open. Thank you for that.
Yeah, as a college student, we have a lot of time that's taken away from us, like due to stress, dealing with activities every day. From a management position, how do you go from the day-to-day activities, to the ground, to taking such things as like big companies, or as you did real estate? How do we make time or find time to build that into our use?
That is the golden question. How do you have time for everything? I think for us, it's one thing that has helped a lot is trying to build it into the routine of your life, trying to find something that you really like doing and that can be done in a way that doesn't distract too much from your daily life. The real estate, it wouldn't be fair to call it a hobby by any means. It's part-time. More recently, India has gone full-time on that, but it was very evolutionary. We would take a trip to Florida and we'd have a strong professional network which basically did a lot of the work for us. So you're outsourcing a lot of that. You're trying to focus on the managerial tasks. You're putting contracts into place. And you do some of that business, and then you go to Disney World, and you kind of balance it out that way. So the kids are happy, the parents are happy. But I think you have to look at how it can fit into the routine of your life, how you can be efficient about doing that. And something we've learned several times the hard way and continue to learn is that you got to be ready to outsource and delegate the things that you probably shouldn't be doing, even if they're fun. And I know, again, that's like such basic advice, you hear that over and over, but we've made that mistake so many times where, oh, but it's fun to mow the lawn, or it's fun to do this, but you can't be doing that and actually running the company. So to be okay to let go of those things, let go and put them in the hands of capable people with good contracts that will deliver on that for a good price. That's just one strategy. I'm sure there's many others.
Mike, you're such an upbeat guy, and I could follow you into probably any disaster because you keep the morale high. But with that said, I'm just amazed with all the situations you've been in. Could you reflect on any one of those that might have not been so pleasant and how you found the strength to deal with it?
All aspects of emergency work have, by definition, really unpleasant aspects to them. And I think in major humanitarian operations, the challenge is the amount of that you face in a relatively short period of time. You're dealing with the equivalent of thousands of single ambulance calls or rescue operations simultaneous, and that can be overwhelming to very seasoned responders. So I think when you're in the moment, you're okay, you're just doing one foot at a time, you're doing your training, you have the support of your network. I think you draw heavily on your values, on your sense of purpose, on the sense of use, on that goal is what keeps you moving while you're on the ground. I think the danger in any sort of this, and it can happen locally from critical incidents, it can happen from international incidents, is that these do take a toll on the brain. And it's only been in the last years that the emergency services have really started to accept the mental health impact that these operations have. In Ontario, for example, occupational stress injuries and PTSD are now part of workers' compensation. It's automatic if you've done those operations and you exhibit those symptoms, you are accepted for a workplace injury, and it's treated as a workplace injury, and you're given whatever support you need to go through that. So I think there's kind of that two parts. There's the getting through it and the focusing on the mission and the trying to keep your niceness, which is something Scott would talk about a lot in emergency services. This is customer service. You're being nice to your colleagues. You're working 23 hours a day. So you try and keep that. You try to be a good person. You do your job. You focus on your use. But we're really, I think learning a lot more about the other side of the coin, the post-disaster aspects of this, and evolving our systems to that after significant challenges. More frontline emergency responders are lost to suicide than are lines of duty death, and that's an extraordinary statistic, and it's one that we at provincial level, national level are addressing with great urgency, but it's so important to focus on that side of it as well.
Mike, this has just been an incredible experience being here tonight, seeing you as that third grader back so long ago in Toronto. Your energy level hasn't changed. I remember you and Landon zipping around the Sinisfet house. Landon was the Green Hornet. I can't remember who you were in those wars, but it's just, I've seen you maybe 3 times since those days, and I just can't believe all that's happened to you and the amazing gifts that you have brought into the world, that you have contributed into the lives of others, and it just is, for an old man like me, very rewarding to look back and see someone who has contributed so much. Thanks for sharing tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.